welcome to the deep dive. Come on in, because today we're jumping into a real cornerstone text, Plato's Laches.
Yep, just this one dialogue today. We're really going to unpack it.
And it kicks off with something that feels, well, surprisingly familiar, right?
Absolutely. You've got these two Athenian dads, Lysimachus and Melesius. Respected guys.
Their own fathers were apparently quite famous.
Huge figures, yeah. Aristides, the Just, and Thucydides. But these sons, Lysimachus and Melesius, they kind of feel like their education got overlooked, because their dads were always busy with public life.
Ah, that feeling of wanting to do better for your own kids. I get that.
Totally relatable. So they're really focused on making sure their sons get the best education possible. And the thing that sparks this whole conversation,
I love it.
they just saw this demonstration. A guy named Stesilaus fighting in full heavy armor.
Like a sort of martial arts display, the latest thing.
Pretty much, yeah. And they're wondering, hey, is this useful? Should our sons learn this skill? Seems practical enough on the surface.
Just about combat training.
Right. But they figure they need advice. So they've done some heavy hitters. Two well-regarded generals, Nicias and Laches.
Okay, military experts.
And of course, Socrates. You know things are going to get interesting when he shows up.
Definitely. So our mission here is to follow where that conversation leads. It starts with fighting techniques, but, well, with Socrates there.
It's bound to go deeper.
Way deeper. It quickly moves beyond how to fight to questions about what makes someone, fundamentally good, virtuous, and especially how do you actually teach something like courage?
So the fathers pose the question to the generals first. Nicias, Laches, what's your take? Is teaching young men this armored fighting technique a good idea?
And surprise, surprise, they don't agree.
Yeah.
You immediately see these two different personalities, Nicias and Laches.
Yeah, Nicias often seen as the more, maybe, intellectual type. He's generally for it.
What are his reasons?
He thinks it's got several upsides. For one, great physical workout, the gymnastics of war, he calls it. Plus, he thinks it's useful not just in, formation fighting, but also when battles break down. Chaos.
When things get messy, man to man.
Exactly. He argues it could actually save someone's life then. But he goes further.
Oh.
He reckons it makes a man braver, more self-possessed, says it even makes them look better, more imposing on the battlefield.
Really? Intimidation factor.
Apparently. And maybe, just maybe, it sparks an interest in the bigger picture, like strategy, puts them on the path to leadership.
Okay, that's quite a positive spin. Now, Laches. He's the other general, right? More the boots on the ground type.
That's him. Very practical, very direct. And he's completely against teaching this skill. Thinks it's nonsense.
Why? What's his reasoning?
His main point is simple. If this was actually any good in real war, wouldn't the Spartans be doing it?
Ah, the Spartans.
Yeah.
The ultimate warriors in their world.
Exactly. And they don't practice this armored fighting stuff. So for Laches, case closed. If the best don't do it, it can't be worthwhile.
He's trusting the expert's actions, basically.
Absolutely. He thinks the guys teaching it are, well, pretty much useless in a real fight. And he tells this story, that's actually quite funny, about Stesilaus.
The guy who gave the demonstration.
The very same one. Laches says he saw Stesilaus in a naval battle once, trying to use this fancy weapon, a scythe spear.
Uh-oh.
And he got it tangled up in the ship's rigging. Just stuck.
Oh, embarrassing.
Totally. Laches paints this picture of him struggling, looking ridiculous, everyone laughing his own side and the enemy, until he just gives up and leaves the weapon behind.
Huh. So much for the intimidation factor Nicias mentioned. That story kind of kills the argument for Laches.
Completely. He figures the skill is either totally pointless or just a waste of time and resources. An imposition, he calls it.
Okay.
And he adds this interesting psychological observation, too. He says if someone learns this but is actually a coward, it just makes them reckless because they think they're skilled.
False confidence.
Right. But
Yeah.
if they are actually brave, then any small mistake they make gets blown out of proportion and mocked because people are jealous of their reputation.
Wow, okay. So Nicias says it builds character and skill. Laches says it's useless and potentially harmful or embarrassing. The fathers must be confused.
Totally stuck. So naturally, they turn to Socrates. Ask him to break the tie.
And Socrates, being Socrates, probably doesn't just say Nicias is right or Laches is right.
Not a chance. He immediately questions the whole idea of settling it with a vote. He asks, why would you decide something so crucial, your son's education, your most valuable possessions, just based on who has more votes?
Good point. You need expertise, not just majority rule for something like that.
That's exactly his point. It's like picking a doctor or a trainer. You listen to the person who actually knows the subject, not just the most popular opinion.
Right.
So Socrates shifts the whole conversation. He introduces the prior question. He says, look, we're not really talking about the fighting technique itself. That's just like the tool or the medicine.
Okay, so what are they talking about?
The real subject, he says, is the goal, the thing they want to improve.
Yeah.
Which is the character, the souls of these young men.
Ah, okay. So the fighting is just one possible way to affect their character, but the character itself is the main issue.
Precisely. So the real question isn't, is this technique good? It's who here actually understands how to improve a soul? Who's skilled in that art? Who had good teachers for that?
That completely changes the game, from combat skills to, well, the art of virtue education.
Totally. And Socrates does his usual thing, claims he doesn't know, says he couldn't afford the fancy teachers, the sophists who claim to teach this stuff.
Huh. Typical Socrates. Humble brag.
Maybe a little.
Mm.
But then he puts the challenge to Nicias and Laches.
What does he ask them?
He says, okay, if you think you know about this, tell us who your teachers were. Or show us your works, point to the people you've personally made better, more virtuous.
Prove it, basically.
Yeah. Or, he warns them, you have to admit that teaching these boys would be your very first attempt at this. And you don't want to experiment on something so precious. His analogy is like learning pottery by starting with the biggest, most valuable jar you might break it.
Don't practice on your kids' souls. Powerful stuff. How do the generals react?
Well, Nicias seems to get it. He recognizes Socrates' method, how he draws you into examining your own beliefs. But Nicias is actually willing to go along with it. He sees the benefit in that kind of self-reflection.
Okay, he's open to it. What about Laches, the straightforward soldier? Is he annoyed?
Laches says something interesting. He says he likes discussions when people are honest, when their words match their actions. He calls it the Dorian mode, like a harmony. He hates hypocrisy.
Right.
But crucially, he respects Socrates. He mentions seeing Socrates fight bravely at the Battle of Delium. Because Socrates walked the walk, Laches trusts him and is willing to be questioned by him, even though Socrates is younger.
So his respect is earned through action. Okay, the stage is set. They're ready to go deeper.
And Socrates lays out the path. If we want to know how to impart virtue, or even just courage, we first need to figure out what virtue or courage is.
Makes sense. You can't teach what you don't understand.
Exactly.
Yep.
And since the whole thing started with fighting, they agreed to narrow it down and focus on just one part of virtue for now. Courage.
Which brings us to that huge fundamental question. What is courage?
And Laches, the man of action, takes the first shot. His definition comes straight from his experience.
Which is?
Courage is staying at your post, facing the enemy, and not running away. Simple, clear, soldierly.
Seems reasonable. But Socrates?
Socrates immediately finds issues. He points out, well, what about fighting effectively while retreating, like cavalry tactics, or like the Spartans themselves did at Plataea? They fell back strategically before winning.
So just standing still isn't the whole picture.
Not at all. Socrates pushes Laches for something broader, a definition that works not just for soldiers in formation, but for sailors in storms, people facing illness or poverty, politicians standing firm.
Okay, courage in lots of different contexts.
And not just facing external threats like pain or danger, but also, crucially, courage against internal things like resisting desires or pleasures.
Whoa. Resisting pleasure takes courage. That's a big expansion.
It really makes you think differently, doesn't it? So Laches tries again, attempt number 2. Courage is a kind of endurance of the soul.
That sounds more general, more applicable across situations.
It does. Socrates agrees it's closer. But then he asks, wait a minute. Courage is supposed to be a good thing, right? A noble quality.
Yeah, of course.
But is all endurance good? What about stubbornly enduring in a foolish plan? Or enduring a bad habit? That kind of endurance isn't noble. It could even be harmful.
Right, so just enduring isn't enough. It has to be the right kind of endurance.
Exactly. Which leads Laches to his third attempt. Courage is wise endurance.
Okay, adding wisdom into the mix. That seems promising. How does Socrates test that?
He uses some analogies, like, is it courageous to wisely invest your money enduring short-term spending for long-term gain? Laches says, no, that's just smart investing. Or is a doctor courageous when he wisely endures a sick patient's begging for harmful food or drink and refuses? Laches says, no, that's just sound medical practice. Wisdom, yes, but not really courage.
So wisdom alone doesn't make endurance courageous.
Then Socrates hits him with a military example right in Laches' wheelhouse. Imagine two soldiers enduring in a fight. One knows tactics, knows he has reinforcements coming, has a good position, knows the enemy is weaker, he endures wisely.
Okay.
The other soldier is ignorant of all that. He's in a bad spot, outnumbered, no backup in sight, but he endures anyway. Who's more courageous?
Ah, Laches, the soldier, probably feels the second guy is braver, right?
Yeah.
The one enduring against the odds without the safety net of knowledge.
That's exactly what Laches says. The one enduring foolishly, in a way, seems more courageous, but this blows up the definition.
So?
Because if courage is wise endurance, the knowledgeable soldier should be more courageous. But Laches just said the ignorant soldier is braver. So courage now looks like foolish endurance.
But they already agreed foolish endurance is bad and courage is good.
Total contradiction. Laches is tied in knots. He admits it. He says something like, our words aren't matching up. They're not in that Dorian harmony. He feels like he knows what courage is deep down, but he just can't put it into words properly. He's stumped.
Okay, so Laches is out. This is when Nicias steps back in. The more intellectual general.
Yep. Nicias says he remembers hearing Socrates say something like, every person is good at the things they are wise about.
Okay.
So Nicias figures, since courage is good, it must be some kind of wisdom or knowledge.
Laches probably scoffs at that, thinking courage and wisdom are obviously different.
He does find it a bit silly, yeah.
Mhm.
But Socrates encourages Nicias to explain what kind of wisdom is courage exactly.
And Nicias gives his big definition.
Courage is the knowledge of what is to be feared and what is to be hoped for, basically. Knowledge of what's truly dangerous and what's truly safe or confidence-inspiring. And not just in war, he says, but in all situations.
Knowledge of future dangers and future hopes.
Essentially, yes. Laches immediately jumps on this. He asks, okay, do doctors know about diseases? That inspires fear. Are doctors courageous? Do farmers know about crop failures? Are farmers courageous?
Good point. Does knowing your field automatically make you brave?
Nicias has a clever reply, though. He says, no, doctors and farmers only know the technical aspects, the signs of danger in their specific craft. They don't necessarily know whether facing that specific danger, whether living or dying in that instance, is ultimately a good or bad thing for the person involved.
So it's a deeper knowledge, Nicias means. Not just predicting outcomes, but knowing the value of those outcomes.
Exactly. Nicias claims only the truly courageous person possesses this deeper knowledge of what is truly fearful and evil, and what's truly hopeful, a good in the ultimate sense.
Ice is probably thinking, this sounds pretty abstract.
Yeah, Laches sarcastically suggests that to know that you'd have to be some kind of prophet or even a god.
Okay, so Socrates then takes over the questioning of Nicias' definition.
Right, and Socrates starts with a simple question. If courage is this special kind of knowledge, can animals be courageous? Or little kids?
Because most people would say yes, a lion defending cubs is brave. A child standing up to a bully shows courage.
But Nicias' definition implies they can't be truly courageous because they don't have that sophisticated philosophical knowledge of good and evil, fear and hope.
So what does Nicias say they have?
He bites the bullet and says animals and children aren't courageous, they're just fearless because they're ignorant. They don't grasp the real danger. True courage, for Nicias, has to be thoughtful, based on this knowledge. What looks like bravery in the ignorant is just, well, rashness.
Laches must hate that. It denies courage to so many traditionally seen as brave.
Laches definitely objects. It feels like Nicias is just twisting words to fit his theory. Nicias tries to smooth it over, compliments Laches, and mentions his definition is inspired by smart teachers, sophists like Damon and Prodicus, known for these kinds of precise distinctions.
Okay, so Nicias is sticking to his intellectual guns. How does Socrates continue the critique?
Socrates gets Nicias to confirm two things. First, that courage is only one part of virtue, alongside justice, temperance, etc.
Right, they agreed on that earlier.
And second, that fearful things mean future evils, and hopeful things mean future goods or the absence of future evils. So Nicias' definition means courage is the knowledge of future goods and evils.
Still following Nicias' idea, knowledge of what's bad or good down the road.
But then Socrates brings in a classic Socratic point about knowledge. Any real science or field of knowledge like medicine or farming or military strategy doesn't just deal with the future, right? It covers its subject across all time, past, present, and future.
Ah, okay. A doctor knows past diseases, present symptoms, and future prognosis. Makes sense.
So Socrates argues if courage is truly a form of knowledge, as Nietzsche claims,
Then it can't just be knowledge of future goods and evils.
exactly, it must be the knowledge of good and evil in the past, present, and future. It has to be knowledge of all good and evil, full stop.
Whoa, okay, so where does that lead?
Well, think about it. If someone possesses the complete knowledge of all good and evil in all times regarding all things, what would that person be like?
They'd know the right thing to do in absolutely every situation. They'd understand justice, temperance, piety, everything.
Precisely. They wouldn't just be courageous, they would possess all the virtues. They'd be perfectly virtuous because they'd have complete knowledge of good and evil.
So Nices's definition, when pushed to its logical conclusion, means courage isn't just a part of virtue. It's the whole thing.
That's the inescapable conclusion, which completely contradicts their starting point that courage was just one piece of the puzzle.
Wow. So both attempts failed. Laches' practical definition based on endurance got tangled in contradictions, and Nices's intellectual definition based on knowledge ended up being so broad it became all of virtue itself. They're back to square one.
Pretty much. They have to admit they haven't successfully defined courage. Laches is clearly disappointed, maybe a little smug towards Nicias, who had sounded so sure of himself with his fancy definition.
And Nices gets a bit defensive.
A little bit, yeah. He basically accuses Laches of being more interested in proving him wrong than in actually finding the truth together. A very human moment.
So what happens with the original question? What about the fathers and their sons?
Well, Laches tells the fathers, look, don't take advice from me or Nicias on this. We clearly don't know what we're talking about. You should ask Socrates.
And Nicias actually agrees with that.
He does. He even says he wishes Socrates would teach his own son.
But Socrates doesn't just step up and say, okay, I'll teach them.
No, and this is the really key takeaway. Socrates refuses to be the sole authority. He points out that all of them, the generals, the fathers, himself included, are equally confused. They all fail to define courage. So none of them is really qualified to be the ultimate teacher here.
So if none of them knows, what should they do? Just give up.
No, Socrates offers different advice, profound advice, really. He says they all, including the older men, need to go out and find the very best teacher they can for themselves and for the boys, spare no expense.
Everyone needs to become a student again.
Yes. And don't be embarrassed about it, even at their age. He quotes Homer, "Modesty is not good for a needy man."
Meaning, if you realize you lack knowledge, especially about something as important as virtue, you can't let pride stop you from seeking it out. They need this knowledge.
Exactly. And Lysimachus, one of the fathers, is really inspired by this. He immediately makes plans to meet Socrates the next day to start the search for these teachers. The whole thing circles back from a specific question about fighting through this deep philosophical maze to a very practical, humbling resolution. The pursuit of knowledge is ongoing for everyone.
So to recap this whole journey, we started wanting practical advice on basically a weapons training course for teenagers.
Should they learn to fight in armor? Simple question.
But it spiraled into this incredibly deep discussion about virtue, specifically courage. And they couldn't pin it down.
No, it proved incredibly difficult. We saw Laches, the practical warrior, offer definitions based on action and endurance, but they fell apart under questioning.
Then Nicias, the more intellectual general, offered a definition based on knowledge, but that expanded until it encompassed all of virtue, which wasn't right either.
And Socrates' role was crucial, wasn't it? Not giving answers, but showing through persistent questions that maybe none of them really knew what they thought they knew, revealing their ignorance in a constructive way.
Definitely. And the final realization is quite striking. Even these experienced, respected men, including Socrates in his own way, acknowledge their confusion.
And the solution wasn't for one expert to dictate, but for everyone to recognize their need for learning and seek out the best teachers.
So the takeaway for you, listening in, isn't just about ancient Greece or the definition of courage. It's maybe that powerful reminder from Socrates.
Yeah, that humility, that realizing you don't have all the answers no matter how old or experienced you are, is actually the first step towards gaining real wisdom. And that seeking knowledge, especially about how to live well, is a lifelong task.
It certainly leaves you thinking, doesn't it? If these brilliant minds struggled so much to define just one virtue like courage.
How solid is our own understanding of the qualities we value most? Things like justice or honesty or compassion. Do we really know what they mean, or are we just working with fuzzy ideas?
Are we brave enough, like Socrates advised, to admit when we don't know and actually go searching for better understanding, no matter our age or status? Something to definitely mull over.